Hi, everyone, and welcome to another panel discussion here at UKC during lockdown. I'm back here again with Louis Parkinson, Captain Cutloose, and Neil Gresham. And today we're going to talk about movement. So we've talked a bit about motivation as well as fingerboarding, which is more the strength side of things. And I think, we kept coming back to this same point, was that climbing is such a skill dependent sport, and working on movement at home during lockdown requires probably a little bit more creativity than just popping a fingerboard up in your home. And not only is it really important thing that we want to develop in order to progress in climbing, but I don't know about you guys, it's also just a part of climbing that I really enjoy. I think it's very inherently satisfying to sort of problem solve in climbing and work out different sequences and movements. So what I'd like to start with is learning a little bit about your guys' personal experience. I know we see a board in the background there for Louis now, but that wasn't always there. So do you want to tell us a bit about, before you had your board, was there anything you found really useful for working on your movement at home?
I've been really excited about this discussion. I love talking about movement and skills learning in climbing. So yeah, as Maddy was saying, now I've got my nice home wall, which is great because if it comes to like training specific movement skills for climbing, then yeah, climbing is great. That would be the best one. But that wasn't an option for me until a couple of months ago. So before then, I had a fingerboard, but that was about it. So yeah, as Maddy's saying, I started to get quite creative with the sort of methods I used to practice my movement. I set up a small slack line, which I found really, really good for working on. It's a fair amount of core strength, it's a lot of leg strength, and it's a huge amount of balance, and it's really, really fun. So I really enjoyed working on that. I also don't know how relevant this was to climbing, but it was really fun and kept me occupied. Do you guys know what a reflex ball is?
Oh my God, is that where, do you attach it to your head and punch it? Yeah, I've just got one of these. It's like amazing. I'm so into it. It's like a challenge every single night.
I'm punching my head, so I don't think I need one.
Yeah, it's so good for hand-eye coordination. They're like a few quid off Amazon.
And it looks marvelous as well. So I got one of those and got really addicted to that because, really good for training hand-eye coordination, really addictive and just fun. I enjoyed it. I did end up using my fingerboard really inventively to try and, I was just desperate for climbing at this point. So I was doing made up boulder problems on my Beastmaker. So I'd like send out the rules to friends going, okay, so you have to start on this edge and then you can put your feet on the door frame, but then you have to come through that way to the next edge. Then you have to cut loose, touch your feet to the ceiling, then you come back around and grab that one. So I was kind of like making up really varied climbs. And then aside from that, I was getting to do loads of live sessions where I'd do loads of like floor-based coordination work with people. So that mix of those four things did wonders for me. That was really good. How about you, Neil?
Well, I guess much the same, doing kind of like everything you can possibly do apart from the one thing that you really want to do, which is climb. And in the first lockdown, all I had was a fingerboard. And in fact, even in this lockdown, all I've had up until 3 days ago was just a fingerboard. But I've now added a little kind of campus with a kickboard type thing. But let's rewind back to, prior to that, I've always felt that there's a really like the link between flexibility and technique is more direct than a lot of people recognize. Some people say, they're completely separate things, and working on flexibility won't necessarily improve your technique. Whereas, for me, it does. If I feel more supple and looser, and you just look at, if you think of the climbers who you really admire, those ones with that really like magic balletic style, guess what? They're all flexible. There's no climbers who really move amazingly who are stiff. So I did a lot of stretching, and also I think. Now, this is a really personal thing. Some climbers find finding lockdown so difficult that they don't like to think too much about the quags and climbing and their goals. They just find it too frustrating. Whereas I'm one of those who I have to keep this at the front of my mind. Otherwise, I can't take myself into the training room and do the fingerboard. In fact, the way I do it is I really try and form a close association between the holds I'm using on the board and my project. I'm thinking about those when I'm doing my half crimp, my front three, I'm thinking about those holds on my project that are half crimp front three. And even when I'm on the TRX doing the, suspension, doing my hand tags, I'm, in a wide T position, it's like, oh, I'm doing a compression move in Fontainebleau, or, when I'm doing an I like this, it's like, oh, I'm doing this is a Gaston move. And like, I keep this sort of the metaphors with climbing really quite rich in my training. And that way it's not boring because, Maddy, you nailed it right at the start. Climbers love technique and they love movement. And that's why we climb, because we don't just like going on a turbo trainer or pushing weights in a gym. But I feel that you can sort of somehow fuse this, the imagery of climbing with exercises which are essentially pretty dull and not much different to weight training. I guess that was my approach. I mean, Louis, like yourself, I ran a few online sessions where I was doing, some of the floor exercises, some of which require a bit of balance and a bit of skill as well as core strength. So I was doing a few of those. Yeah, I guess everything apart from actually climbing. But I guess I should also qualify here that I see myself as I'm one of those climbers who, probably my technique and my skill side is the best part of my climbing. And if anything, what's going to help me climb harder is improving my finger strength. So I guess I wasn't so worried about potential losses in movement. And I felt that, I would be able to top them up really quickly. So I wasn't too worried about it, but that's me. And I do appreciate that, for climbers who are the opposite to that, who are pretty strong and who find movement a weakness, well, that's more of a challenge. And hopefully that's why we're having this discussion to see what we can pull out of the bag for those guys.
Mm-hmm. Maddy, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, guys. I mean, I think that you guys have really covered the full spectrum there, which is, I guess, how I've sort of compartmentalized this in my mind is that we have I found that lockdown's often about picking out the ingredients that I find in like the movement side of climbing. So I do have a board, so obviously I can climb on that, and it's a very privileged position to be in. But a board, for anyone out there who has one, they are quite a particular style. So yeah. I think if you've got a board, or for anyone listening, you can still listen on, because I actually think that we all know that when we get back out there on the rock, there's such a wider variety of movements and styles that we still really want to keep up that side of movement. So for me, it's actually been sort of doing what I can on the board, which is very basic strength and power, and then finding different ways to fulfill that sort of challenge side. And for me, actually, Louis, it's so funny that you mentioned that punching thing, because my hand-eye coordination and that sort of fast response, I would say, is quite undeveloped, because I've come from a background of trad climbing. So this sort of thing for me is a really good challenge. And I was so terrible when I picked it up, and I'm still pretty terrible. I don't know about you, I got a hard and a soft one. So that's what it just
I
came with.
I don't mess around with the hard one. That's asking for a broken nose. No, I go for the small one, and I've been trying to do I do loads of different challenges of the simple one of how many times can I hit it. Then I'll try and alternate hands. Then I'll do blocking and dodging. I'm also turning into a really deadly fighter doing all this. So watch out, folks.
But what exactly
it sounds
climbing is anybody's guess.
And if I ever get in some kind of heavyweight battle with a small black rubber ball, I'm sorted. So yeah.
Wow, it sounds like you're definitely at a more advanced level than me. But I think you've really hit the nail on the head there, whereas I try and make a sequence and a challenge, which is novel and new for me, to try and push my movement side of things. And then Neil, because I am able to climb on a board, yet I feel I am a climber that likes to use my flexibility when I'm outside. I've really looked to keep that up, because a board, I'm not really using the same range of motion that I would usually use in climbing. So I think we've kind of come onto this quite organically in terms of this sort of challenge element of movement, which I think is so important when we want to train this skill at home during lockdown. So when it comes to movement learning and, developing those motor skills, it's very much shown that we need to do this in a way that challenges us, so that we make mistakes. And it is this learning from mistakes and correcting. This is where the learning happens and the sort of our skills develop. And this sort of delayed feedback is a really important element of it. So I know you guys will know this, but for anyone watching, immediate feedback in the moment, when you're out climbing and your friend says, no, put your right foot higher, all that sort of stuff. As much as in the moment, it often makes our movement or the outcome of our performance better, we don't tend to learn from this and sort of retain that skill as much in the long run. So, you know, in some ways, this is an opportunity for us to sort of remove that immediate feedback we potentially get when we're doing movement practice during climbing. So I just sort of kind of interested to know what you guys think about that, and whether there's any ways you think that people can really recreate that feedback element of movement, whether it comes to sort of you know, reflecting on where their body was in space, or how they were moving in a certain task.
Well, I mean, I'm only going to I think you're probably better to kick off, Louis, because I would almost suggest that, I presume when you did the slack line, you just saying the further you get on this slack line, that's a measure, isn't it? Because the hard thing, I mean, at the best of times, it's hard to measure and quantify technique. As you say, Maddy, usually it comes from a friend. I mean, we're not always being, you know, very rarely are we coached, and do we, you know, have someone videoing us or anything like that. So usually we are having to just try and, you know, like guess it for ourselves. But something like slacklining, brilliant, isn't it? Because if you get further along the line, or you stay on it another 10 seconds, you've improved. Or, you know, things like handstands, you know, standing on one leg, any balancing exercise, you just simply go against the clock, and therefore you're going to get that type of feedback. And I think that's really important from a motivational perspective, especially in lockdown. Because I think if you just say to yourself, oh, I'm going to do a bit of movement, and it's all a bit woolly, and you think, well, am I improving? Maybe I'm going backwards. I don't really know. I'm just going to give up. Whereas if you're kind of constantly dangling those carrots, then you're going to see some progress. I mean, is that what you were doing quite a lot, Louis?
Pretty much, yeah. I was going to agree generally that the idea of repeatedly giving yourself feedback is not just important, it's like essential for the learning process. As Maddy's saying, like if you're getting immediate feedback, like if you're doing a task and someone else is watching saying, oh, no, do this slightly differently, that's really, really helpful in you improving the movement. But exactly as you're saying, Maddy, it doesn't really help for your own like learning skills that you should be able to do that on your own. So I think a really, really good skill that you can develop is remembering exactly what position you were in, either like on the wall or when you're doing whatever challenge it was, then being able to recall what position you were in after you finished and work out, okay, why was that working? Why didn't it work? All these other things. Having a measurable challenge like the slack line or the reflex ball, where you're just trying to see how many times you can hit it, those are great because, yeah, as you say, you're really clearly progressing if you can do more and more of it. But I usually go for like two different kinds of challenge. There's like the measurable, like slacklining or the reflex ball would be the two easiest examples. We're talking about them already. Those are really, really nice because either I do it successfully or I fail and I fall off, and I obviously immediately notice when I've got hit in the face by the reflex ball or I've fallen off the slack line. So there's a really clear opportunity for me to go, okay, why didn't that work just then? Where was I looking? Where were my shoulders? What was I doing wrong? If I'm struggling to recall all of that stuff, which is obviously quite difficult if you're new to it, then I'd simply just start filming myself so that you're able to look at that and start getting that feedback. But I sometimes go for those harder challenges where I either succeed if I do everything correctly, or I don't succeed and I need to reassess a bit more. Sometimes I go, if I want an easier day though, I might go for like some kind of like movement challenge or balance challenge, which I know I can consistently complete without too much difficulty. And then I'll just go for a much slower pace and get a lot more mindful about, okay, it's not just, I want to repeat this challenge again. I want to do it really, really, really well. So I'd start looking at all of the small details and I'd just do the same challenge over and over again. But whatever method I'm doing, the really important step in that whole process is in between rounds, being able to assess and work out what did and didn't work. So overall, long-winded answer to yes, that feedback loop is super important.
Hearing Louis talk about this, I mean, I think, you know, Maddy, prior to this discussion, you know, when we all sort of said, oh, who's been looking into this the most in lockdown? And we all agreed it was Louis, you know, and
I've been doing some weird stuff.
No, but I wanted to just ask you, Louis, do you feel, I mean, I think one of the reasons probably is because I know you do struggle a bit with just hanging off a fingerboard and you know, like a lot of good, but is the other reason that you've really looked into this because you're very passionate about competition climbing? All I'm wondering is that, you know, Maddy says, oh, she comes from a trad climbing background. You know, does all this like proprioception, fast reflex stuff really, is it like least relevant to trad climbers and most relevant to comp climbers? And then do sport climbers kind of sit somewhere in the middle on the scale?
Generally, I think, okay, we're talking kind of along a spectrum of how much momentum do climbers use. And when we say like, oh, proprioception and movement skills, kind of what we're saying is trad climbers climb slowly and statically, boulderers jump everywhere, and sport climbers are somewhere in the middle. I know that's a generalization, but that's often what we picture when we're talking about these different movement styles. It's tricky when we talk about most efficient, and I won't talk too long about this because with trad climbing, you might go for a slightly less efficient style where you're like locking off holds and reaching for stuff, because if you slip, it's like quite a significant fall and it's not the sort of thing that you can fall off regularly. Whereas bouldering, if I'm just trying to do a move, I might go for it slightly more dynamically because it doesn't matter if I fall off it. This is getting really, really complicated because essentially what I'd say is that, yeah, moving more dynamically is more efficient, except for the fact that it massively reduces the margin for error, which then makes it look a lot less efficient where it's not working. Because I'm just going off on a random tangent now, I'd say everyone should practice moving more dynamically. There are times when you shouldn't, obviously, when you're trad climbing, but it's a really useful skill to have. And I think everyone would benefit from being a bit more dynamic and a bit more fluid with their climbing sometimes. I'll stop talking now because otherwise I'm just going to make things more confusing.
Well, no, thanks for that, Louis. And I think you really hit the nail on the head there. And I would agree. I guess as someone who's very passionate about trad climbing, I actually think that what we're talking about here is like movement as a whole. And I think you're right that sort of improving being dynamic and, hand-eye coordination as a skill, off the wall from climbing can still very much be transferred to a lot of different styles, because ultimately efficient movement comes through to distributing weight and moving through different positions, quickly and efficiently. And I think that can be applied to all. But just to sort of round off on the question with sort of a few of my thoughts, I really liked, Louis, what you mentioned about, I guess, that variety of challenge that you can find within any sort of movement exercise that you're choosing to do during lockdown. And I think this is one of the most important elements I find to it, is really setting it as a challenge for yourself and making sure you get that challenge level right so that you are learning from it. You need to be sort of failing at this, maybe trying to do some sort of one-legged squat exercise. You need to be maybe losing balance and tumbling it over. If this is a sort of level of difficulty that you need in order to be learning from it. And then feedback-wise, I think filming yourself is a really good idea, because essentially you get this opportunity to look at your body in space just after having experienced and felt how that feels. And you're sort of asking your question to yourself, how would I be more balanced? And then you try it again. And I guess this is the process of learning. I really like using constraints, I think, to make movements hard. Mm-hmm. And by that, I mean like adding like a limiting factor. So this could be like, being on a plank and then removing a hand, or like doing some animal walks and you're only allowed 3 points of contact on the floor at any one time. Again, because I just think this is a really nice way to make movement training during lockdown like playtime. I guess that's what I like to see it as. Okay, so there's a lot of discussion about training goals during lockdown, and these help keep us focused and motivated. And we often, when you say the word training goal, we tend to think of like piling on weights on the fingerboard or doing pull-ups, these very much like sport specific strength exercises. But is it useful to have a movement-based training goal? We've already touched on this a bit. It might have been like the amount of time you could spend on a slack line, or doing a certain sequence maybe on a slack line, stepping forward, stepping back. But yeah, I guess I'd just like to know whether you think that they are useful to have and kind of write down, and any particular ones you think are useful potentially for certain climbers out there. So, we've touched a bit on trad climbers, boulderers, route climbers. Neil, do you want to kick us off?
I guess, I'll sort of perhaps steer it slightly away from the balancing exercises, because I feel that's more Louis' domain anyway, and talk more about the bit that I've been doing the most of, and that's like flexibility work. This is obviously, like the backdrop to this argument is how relevant flexibility training is going to be to your movement. And if you are one of those climbers like myself who believes it's pretty relevant, it could therefore tempt you to set quite tough goals, you know, and you're thinking, right, well, you know, the more flexible I get, the better my movement's going to be, the more flexible, and so on and so forth. That's all very well. But I mean, rather like with strength training, we know what happens if you set a curve that's too steep. You know, with flexibility training, I find myself saying this a lot to clients who I set programs for, you know, don't be too competitive with yourself. You know, it's like when you're doing the box splits or something like that, you know, especially if you've got a mirror or what have you, or you're measuring your distance off the floor, you're going, oh, you know, I'm going to push down a little bit more. I mean, I know, Louis, you set yourself the goal of doing this.
I was just thinking that. I was like, oh no.
Like, I mean, obviously, do warm up thoroughly before you do flexibility sessions, do some cardio. But I would say that, you know, I'm doing more stretching this lockdown than I've ever done, and I'm seeing some great improvements. And I just don't think you need to really don't push yourself. You know, have a goal, have a target, but just don't, you know, set yourself a curve like that rather than a curve like that. Because if you twang something, you're going to be gutted because you're not going to be able to do that stretching session, or you're going to have to massively, you know, limit the number of stretches that you do. I mean, that's it really from that side of things.
I completely agree, man. I think you both know I'm actually not much of a goal setter generally. I quite like to just be process focused, and I like just doing things because they're fun. Weirdly, with this sort of stuff, I have set myself some specific goals though. Like, as Neil says, I have set myself the goal, or no, I haven't even been as firm as setting myself a definitive goal that I've written down in a logbook or anything. I've very clearly got it into my head how much I would like being able to do the full splits and how useful that would be for my climbing. But as Neil says, that's quite a big goal, and to race towards that too quickly would be painful and probably not that smart. So actually, my real goal is I'm going to do an hour's stretching every day. That's the goal that I try and stick to, which is a lot more manageable. Again, we talked a little bit about being competitive with stuff. Sometimes it can be helpful, but again, please be really careful with it. It depends on the exercise, depends who you're competing against. I just wanted to mention that, yeah, sometimes obviously competition can be really good for motivation. Both my housemate Jack and I have we said about a month ago, oh, okay, yeah, we really want to get into just doing a bit more antagonist work. We want to get better at doing handstands. So why don't we set ourselves the challenge of every day we're going to do a cumulative amount of 10 minutes spent balancing on our hands with like feet against the wall. It's all fine. So we could do it for like 30 seconds, take a rest, then knock off another 30 seconds, keep going like that. We've never done that. We didn't do it once. But then as soon as we were talking about it a week ago, going, that I can do a 10-second handstand before you can. Now both of us are like slamming out the training, but I'm really comfortable doing that with Jack because we have lots of friendly competitions. I know what he's like to compete against. I feel very safe competing with him against this sort of stuff. And with the exercise of handstands, I don't worry too much about either of us getting injured with that. If it was a competition against someone who I knew was really, really competitive and really aggressive and horrible about it, and we were competing on like who can hang the most weight off the fingerboard or something, that's a bad challenge. That's obviously going to lead to a disaster. But there is something to be said for like friendly competition sometimes.
I think that's a really nice one, Louis. You maybe want to find a competitive friend on Zoom and set up that challenge. Just because I know both of you have touched on flexibility and setting goals here, and not over pushing yourself. I guess I'm just going to come at it from a slightly different angle, just to give people listening maybe an idea of how they can know that they're pushing themselves enough. Because I'm completely with you that we don't want to like over push any particular thing, but actually in my experience, a lot of people push in flexibility because stretching can be a bit uncomfortable. So perhaps if someone is listening and thinks, gosh, I just do go through the motions, you know, with this stretching routine and it's not that effective, this could be why. So what I tend to do is like, maybe if it is the box splits or the front sits, or it's like the pancake and you're leaning forward, just with a book or something like that, set yourself a target to reach for. And I've found that really helpful. And then obviously as you progress, you can push it a little bit further away. And it's sort of having that thing to aim for in your stretching, I found really useful. And then the other thing I've gone for, I mean, Louis, you touched on it, is having this slightly more like process thing rather than just like an end goal. And I don't know if anyone listening has one of those like Swiss bouncy balls. I actually learnt this off a physio in Spain called Pablo Scorza. So anyone could look him up. You probably want to clear a big space, but if you've got a room, there's basically, he goes for these different positions on the ball. And once I could do them, I then made myself a sequence of moving between the positions, a little bit like, I guess, when we go climbing and we red point something, we learn this sequence. And the aim is that I wanted to, obviously, first of all, try and get through the difficult sequence I'd set myself. And then, a bit like Louis said before, it's then a point of mastery to try and do it as well and as controlled and as focused as I could. And I guess for me, that was just a way that I, got that sort of link to climbing in there with my sort of movement type goals. So we often think that technique in climbing is sort of synonymous with good footwork. So this might be a bit of like an old-fashioned view, especially with all the comp coordination stuff now. But have you guys found any ways at home to really keep up this footwork sort of element of climbing? Neil, I know that I think you've got some good ideas on this.
Well, I think that it's pretty easy to build a stand-up kickboard to stick below your hangboard, and I would suggest that, you can get these things as well. There are companies that make, like, literally you just need a piece of ply that sort of size, and you put 2 pieces of timber on the back, so it's like a right angle triangle, and there it is. You shove it under your hangboard, and I'd suggest. We're all used to sort of maybe putting our foot on a chair or standing in slings for doing hangboard exercises for like lowering the load. But that's not so much the purpose here. I'd say the purpose here is for like practicing standing on small footholds. So if you do make a kickboard, put some really bad, like polished screw-ons on it, or some little like rounded dome wooden footholds, like real slippery affairs. Put them under your hangboard, set it slightly back. But the key here is that you maybe do some like repeater style stuff, or you do some like traversing, moving around the board. So you get to the point where you're a little bit pumped, because that's always when we find that our footwork starts to sort of evaporate, when the fatigue kicks in. So you can actually practice getting your fingers and forearms quite tired and getting to the point where your core's going a little bit, and then practicing like pinpointing into these footholds. It's just, you could, well, I was going to say you could shut your eyes and almost be climbing. But if you shut your eyes, you'll probably just fall off. But it's a really similar feeling. It's a really similar experience. What more do you need? What more do you need to do in a way? And if you've been if you've been contemplating that, or you've seen of someone doing it on YouTube or Instagram, and you just thought, what's the point in that? Or, I can't be bothered to do that. I would say, do it. Because not only will it benefit your footwork, but also you can use it for almost like training endurance on a hangboard as an alternative to standing in slings. So yeah, go for it.
Really strongly agree. And all I was going to add was that for anybody who doesn't, for some reason, want Neil's awesome kickboard idea, or that maybe doesn't have the space or the resources to build it, I'd still really recommend a really good exercise I picked up from Jerry Moffat's autobiography ages ago. He was saying that on his rest days in Yosemite, he would just stand in front of a slab wall and he would just pick loads and loads of imaginary points. And he'd just stand in front of it in his climbing shoes and just practice like touching all these different imaginary points with his foot. You don't need, obviously, if you have like a featured wall with holds on it, then great, yeah, use that. But even if you just have a plain blank wall in your house, I'd really recommend put like little markers like with tape or something, put them all over the wall to simulate, okay, these are my footholds, and then stand in front of it and practice really gently and accurately. And you have to be really mindful about it. Don't just like kick the hell out of your wall and pretending you're getting the footholds. Like visualize putting your foot on the tops of those bits of tape. Practice that for a little bit, standing a certain distance, then try it with the other foot, then stand further away, try it again, stand closer, try it again. Try doing it at different speeds. It's really, really helpful. It's one of the exercises I use to like really sort my footwork out, having not been particularly good with footwork previously. But the top level will be getting that kickboard idea. I think that's the one.
Yeah, I think all I'll add there is just a variation on your idea, Louis, which is just adds in a sort of potentially a bit of a strength element in your leg as well. Similarly, take something. I've not used tape, but yeah, maybe a book or, I don't know, a small cup or just anything, household object, and try stand yourself like on the floor with some space around you, place it somewhere at like a challenging distance. And then it's either obviously maybe keeping one leg straight and just extending a leg to touch it. Or if you start putting it further and further, what you'll have to do is use a combination of obviously bending the supporting leg, reaching out with the other leg to try and get it. Depending on what the object is, you could also try and scoop, put pressure on it on the floor. If you get some sort of slidey disc or something, and you can then draw it back in towards yourself. You can put it on the other side of you, so you have to take your leg around the back, swap legs. So sort of a similar thing of trying to pinpoint a point and then arrive there with your toe as if it were a foothold, and then potentially even put pressure on the area and draw it back in. So I guess this sort of leads us quite nicely onto what I'm going to call the north-south divide in climbing. And this isn't whether you actually live in the north or south of the country, or how much milk you have in your tea or anything, but it's the upper and lower body. So training for climbing and climbing in general, I think it can seem very upper body centric. And I think, during lockdown or at any time really, if people get really focused on the upper body and training strength in this region, and it can lead to some people that sort of front wheel drive, I guess we see in climbing sometimes. So I think we've talked a bit about like balance and flexibility in the lower body, but I don't know, how do you think that balancing out strength actually between the upper and lower body plays into movement and technique in climbing? And do you have any exercises for actually building strength through these range of motions that you found useful? Can you guys do a one-legged squat? Maybe that's a good place to start.
So I've been grinning all the way through this because obviously previously king of front wheel drive climbing and so named on Instagram because of it. I used to be pretty terrible with the exactly what you describe of this front wheel drive approach. I never really paid attention to my legs. I used them sometimes, but as soon as I was in any doubt of whether or not I was going to make a move, I'd just pull up into my chest, keep the center of gravity high, feet would come off and just basically be limp all the way through a climb. I cannot stress enough how much focusing on strength in the lower body, mobility in the lower body, and focus in using my lower body has affected my ability to climb. Not just on styles where you'd expect lower body to be more relevant, like slab climbing, but I think, practicing on slabs or just doing different strength exercises like pistol squats or hamstring bridges and things like that, because I spend so much more time engaging the lower body. I'm just so much more used to it, and I'm much better at keeping my weight low, keeping heavy in the feet. Yes, of course, it means that it's translated to me climbing better on slabs, but the thing I didn't expect is it also translated to me climbing loads better on overhangs, because now I've got four-wheel drive, which is loads better, obviously.
So how many one-legged squats can you do?
Should we find out? I reckon...
Go on. Give us one.
All right, let's do it. So wait, is this on one leg consecutively?
This is on one leg consecutively, yeah.
Let me move my chair out.
Okay. This sounds like one of those competitive, nasty challenges that you were just talking about, Louis.
Oh, that's pretty good. I'm well impressed.
That makes me feel sick. That's amazing.
Well,
Wow.
it's really impressive, Louis. So I think he's demonstrated very nicely to us how important that lower body strength is. And I'm pretty sure you couldn't just do that off the bat. You've put in some work there. And I think one-legged squats are great because they really don't require much, equipment or anything. And, Louis is obviously amazing at them, which is great. But you can also just pull on a bit of rope or a TRX and do them assisted. So you can work up to that impressive display of strength there.
I knew I could do lots of them, which is why I was happy to show it off. I've done a lot of years of cycling as well, but also I have a lot of really good progressive exercises for working up to them. The one you were just recommending of using a hand for assistance, I would rate as the best one, because it's like as similar to climbing as you'd get it. You've got a handhold and a foothold. You've got to stand up and you can pull a bit to help you. And then the better you get at it, just pull less and just use the legs. Oh God. Okay. I'm out for the next 5 minutes.
Neil, how about you? Do you have any particular lower body exercises that you found you feel contribute to you being able to, distribute weight well or keep tension through your toes?
Okay, well, here's a fact for you. I last trained my lower body in the interest of sort of thinking it was helping my climbing performance in 1987. You know, when I was a teenager, like I used to go in the gym at school with my mates, you know, and we used to do like heavy barbell squats. And I used to think, oh, well, you know, slab climbing, you've got to be able to stand up on your legs. Heavy barbell squats would be a great idea. You know, I had thighs like tree trunks, and I still have to, you know, I was the antithesis of the, you know, you were the front wheel drive climber. I was the rear wheel drive. You know, I could push myself up slabs all day, but I've definitely was overpowered in the lower body. So, you know, I've basically not, it's absolutely not only is it bottom of my priority list, it's not on my priority list. I think that this is case by case, climber by climber. You know, it's almost like how many one-armers do you need to be able to do? You know, like, do you need to be able to do as many pistol squats as Louis Parkinson? No. Do you have, you know, would being able to do one or two be quite handy? Yes. Well, it depends where you climb. You know, if you want to climb grit or slate slabs, you're damn right it would be. If you want to climb at Santa Linea, do you need to be able to do a pistol squat? Not on your Nelly. You know, it's like it really depends what your goals are, and you know, on your makeup as a climber, but also on your physiology as a climber. Because a lot of climbers, you know, we can bury ourselves in conversations about strength training protocol here and avoiding muscular hypertrophy and so on. The fact is, a lot of climbers like me, you know, show me any type of leg training exercise, even riding a mountain bike, my legs just, they explode.
Whereas I'm the opposite. Oh, go on, Neil, sorry.
Maybe Louis, I dare say, you know, you're looking at your build, you can kind of do what you want and you're not going to build big thighs. So this is something that we have to be mindful of. And you know, it's a controversial subject when we start talking about it. But if you are one of the aforementioned, like me, who, you know, your quads and your glutes are the biggest muscles in your body. They weigh a lot. Your fingers, conversely, are pretty small. The tendons in them are relatively fragile. I had an absolute ground. I go back to 1987. Why did I stop training my legs? Well, I bumped into Jerry Moffat at Froggatt. Oh. I'd ridden up there on my mountain bike, and I was grumbling about. He was like, "Oh, you're right, mate. What are you doing?" I was like, "Oh, not very much, Jerry. I've got injured fingers." And he's like, "Well, I'm not surprised. You know, riding your mountain bike." And I was like, "What's he talking about?" And he goes, "I'll leave you to ponder that one." And of course, I twigged. You know, I sort of looked in the mirror that night, and I was like, "Oh yeah, you know." It's like I've got, you know, these huge thighs. So I stopped doing my barbell squat, stopped riding my mountain bike. I lost a bunch of muscle mass off my legs, and I stopped getting finger injuries, you know, and there we have it. So look, it is really, you know, am I saying that's a blanket ban on all leg training for all climbers? Of course I'm not. I'm saying it's case by case, and it's a complex discussion.
Mm.
Yeah, so I would agree there, and I'm completely on board with what you're saying, that some people do develop muscle at a quicker rate than others, and they maybe don't want to focus a lot of that attention on their legs. But I do actually think that lower body climbing, even say somewhere like Santa Linea, where you can maybe get knee bars and you can really use your legs to drop knee and get that strength. Yeah, I completely get what you're saying. Maybe we don't all need to do as one leg or piss squats like Louis can. But I think for people who have really neglected their lower body and do feel like they're quite front wheel drive, I think that it could be a really interesting way to see if this helps distribute force throughout your body. Because the fact is, they are big, strong muscles, and you might really be able to take weight off your hands, the smaller muscles in your forearms, especially if you've got the flexibility to use it. So I think
is that not more, do you think, Maddy, a matter of technique rather than a matter of strength? You know, like learning I think use them.
So they are two different things, but I think you have to sort of acknowledge sometimes that a certain, you know, more range and flexibility may play in to what we would call better technique. And I think in the same way, more strength in the lower body could translate onto the wall in what we would look at and say is better technique. Like, I guess if we're referring to technique, especially with the lower body, obviously there's a precision element with your toes. There's a mental element of trusting your feet. But I think there is an element of distributing force well throughout your lower body, which means having the flexibility to probably get your body weight close to the wall, And then also having the strength to push against those footholds in a way that allows you to take weight off your upper body. So I think they all roll into one. Like, I think it's a really complex discussion to talk about technique and where strength and flexibility play into that, because I think what we look at as good technique is efficient movement and essentially being able to use what strength you have efficiently. And I guess to me, that often plays out in climbing for people who are very good at distributing that weight and their center of gravity very well on the wall. And I guess I do think that lower body strength can play into that, in how much you can push into your feet. You know, and I think it's like the bit like Louis said, pulling up with the single leg squats. Another thing I think can be quite good for people who struggle a bit more maybe with balance is actually a more momentum sort of single leg squat. So maybe to go from standing, sit down and roll back, and then roll forwards and try and like get that smooth transition of weight from your back onto your feet, along with maybe some things like counter movement jumps. And like, you know, maybe not everyone has a box jump to go onto, but you know, we all see Shauna doing this in her stories, if you have something to jump onto. And those sort of power exercises don't tend to really build muscle in that way. So that could be a really, you know, an interesting way to incorporate it.
If you are just say, because I do a really similar exercise to box jumps, but I don't have a box, you can just pick a distance. Maybe if you're just starting it, pick a distance like a meter in front of you. Pick two really specific foot-shaped targets, and the aim is jump, land in those targets, and land silently. It ends up being really, really powerful because you're having to absorb a lot of the impact into your legs. Really, really precision-based, and you don't need a box, and it's really easy to scale up. You just jump further. So that's a really good one that I really like practicing. Anyway, carry on, Maddy. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds great. So I guess like moving on from this more sort of strength and exercise based part of the discussion, there's something I'm really interested to know your guys' take on. So I don't know about you, but when I get more scared or less focused on my climbing outside, I become more rigid. I don't move as well. I get worse at working out beta. I get that tunnel vision on a certain sort of hold, and I'm missing a hold out there. But essentially, when I'm scared or I'm struggling more with the mental element of climbing, whether that's the exposure or, for some people I speak to, it's a lot of people chatting at the crag, or it could be a pressure to perform in front of whoever's there. I generally move much better. So I guess this is the mental training or more cognitive side of climbing. And I feel like it really plays into movement. So is lockdown an opportunity for us to sort of delve into this and explore whether some mental training might help our climbing? So have either of you guys tried this? Neil, I know you did a trad climb straight after lockdown, so maybe you want to kick us off.
Well, I even just think that basic rituals like trying to memorize the moves on your project, or if you haven't got a project, trying to memorize the moves on something that you did. And when I say memorize, go through it, play it through in real time, because we all have a tendency to go da 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 da, suddenly, like as if we were speed climbing on this thing. And like imagine, bring in texture, bring in sort of, how your muscles feel, bring in, the sounds at the crag, and like how the footholds feel, the amount of friction, how the chalk feels, just make it really sort of, diverse and to get yourself from the bottom of, well, it's harder. I'd say that doing a boulder problem is a challenge enough, just doing that for 6 moves, let alone doing it for some, 30 move, tech fest at Malham. Actually having the mental discipline and the concentration span to, like shut your eyes and do that is a lot harder than it sounds, even to like hardened red pointers. So, that's definitely something you could do, something you can do when you're resting in between, strength-based or endurance-based hangboard exercises. And of course, it's valuable. We know that, there's been so many studies done on the power of this type of imagery, but it just requires discipline to practice. And as you say, Maddy, now is an excellent time.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I try and view this in a fairly, I think, overly simplistic way, but it makes it easier for me to understand that, okay, yeah, I have the same issue, and I think everyone has the same issue, that when we're confident, we can think clearly, and so it's easier to perform the moves because we're clear-headed, we can concentrate on doing the moves well. Then when we're doubting ourselves, for whatever reason that might be, we just have less brain power to put towards doing the move well. So it's harder to move well. I usually find that there's two different reasons that I end up doubting myself. Reason number one, I doubt that I'm actually going to be able to do the move. Like, I'm not that confident with the skill itself. And so that would distract me. So I'm just worried about whether or not I'm actually able to do it at all. But then a kind of completely separate thing would be my worries about what the consequences of messing it up might be. So for me, I don't try climb. I'm not as worried about falling off and hurting myself as you two might be. But I still have, like, you know, lots of fears about, I really, it's very performance motivated. I want to do well in a competition, or I want to succeed on this boulder. I want to have completed it, or whatever it might be. So fear of the consequence of not succeeding on a challenge might also mean we start doubting ourselves. You can kind of practice both of those things. With movement or skills competency, it's kind of a case of picking this skill and rehearsing it to the point where you're like, yeah, I just don't worry about this anymore. I've done it so many times that coming across this skill just doesn't make me nervous. I'm not going to mess it up. No matter how high up I am or what the consequences might be, it doesn't matter because I'm just so confident with this skill. Or alternately, you can start practicing that sort of familiarity with the consequences of failure. So, okay, and maybe not with trad climbing, because that sounds a bit more dangerous, but it might be, okay, yes, I'm really worried about my ability to do this move, but I've fallen from this height so many times. I know that I can land this safely. I'm now not that worried about the consequences. Or for me, it might be with more competition specific. It might be, yeah, I've not won competitions many, many times. I'm comfortable not winning, so I can carry on being confident with other stuff. So if it's a skill that you want to get more competent with, then it is something that you can practice at home. Hopefully, if it's like rock over movements or some of the other balance skills that we've talked about, that is something you can practice and feel more confident about when you get back to the wall. Or if it's that other one of maybe the being less familiar with the consequences of failing on this challenge. Fear of falling, no, you can't practice that at home. But if it's something like I was having of like fear of judgment from others or whatever it might be, that is something that you can start thinking through and rationalizing at home. I think, yeah, definitely worth thinking about.
Yeah, I think you've touched on a really good point there, both of you really, that visualization, which is, I guess, what you guys have talked a lot about, is it both has a component for movement and actually, refining that, a sequence or like feeling your body move between it. But it also has a sort of state of mind element to it. And you can actually, I mean, like Louis just said, clearly you probably can't do fall practice at home, but you can visualize falling and visualize feeling calm. You really bring that about in your body, and that could have a really positive effect and be a good place to start when you do go back to climbing. I think the mental training and sort of cognitive side of climbing is really interesting, and something that I've found over the years, not just during lockdown, is actually sort of really going into that side of things, and maybe reading some books can be a really good place to start. So a few that I think are really good are The Inner Game of Tennis and Rock Warriors Away. So this could be a nice chance during lockdown. I guess a lot of people have a lot more time at home. You could actually delve into those, maybe some podcasts, and this might be a good place to start before you come on to these more practical ideas that I guess we're talking about here. And for me personally, and the way I view things, I generally think of this fear, whether it's around falling or whether it's more of a performance anxiety, for me really comes with a lack of full attention in the present moment. And I've really enjoyed working a lot on this myself. And I guess that attention in the moment is a big part of meditation or maybe mindful movement and yoga. And so I found that really useful for my climbing, and this could be something that people choose to do at home, especially when it comes to not being able to do full practice. The one thing people could do, I know a few people have done this, is if you have got something just to set up being in your harness in, and if the point is people are at a point where they just want to maintain that trust in ropes and quick draws during lockdown, so that when they go back they can put all their movement drills and training to good use and hopefully feel more confident, that could be something worth doing. But yeah, basically I found meditation quite useful for my movement and especially efficiency and really trying to relax my grip. And then from a mindful movement side of things, so a lot of people listening might do yoga, but really anything we've talked about today, for me, mindful movement comes down to moving with full attention and often potentially in some sort of rhythm with my breath, whether that is on a balance ball or whether it's on a footboard, a kickboard, you know, just like really breathing as you like step into each foot. And I think that really helps with that sort of like mind body connection that I guess we talk about a lot in climbing. And when it comes to visualization, a few things that I find really useful, because I don't know about you guys, I get a lot of people thinking that visualization is quite abstract, which I think it can seem, and people wonder if they're doing it right or wrong. And I do understand that. But the thing that really helped me was starting with some of the meditation, because then I felt I actually had the focus and attention to sit down and close my eyes and go through a whole route in my mind without just getting distracted and thinking about like what I was going to have for dinner or whatever. But also to really focus on how the climbing feels rather than what it looks like. You are not an onlooker, you know, sort of looking down on yourself. And it's not just about the sequence of left and right. And I think, like you said, Neil, I really like sort of, thinking of sounds or textures. And I guess it all comes about whatever senses any climber might connect to most vividly in that real world climbing scenario. And maybe people can bring that into their visualization to help with either a project, you know, that maybe people know, or like you guys said, it might be something you've already done, or even just a climb you tried at the wall before lockdown, anything that you have sort of set in your mind. And I think that can be really useful. I don't know if anyone has anything to add before we move on there.
I've got a little one to add, just while we're talking about like visualization of climbs and stuff. Just I wondered what you both thought. That so I've got a specific process that I follow when I'm wanting to rehearse and visualize. If I've got time, I don't do this necessarily in a comp, but if I've got a hard project, either outdoors or in the gym that I really want to get the hang of, I go through like a really specific list of. So whilst looking at the climb, mime out all the moves. I include the footholds. At first, I'm not so specific about visualizing exactly what the hands are doing or how the holds feel. I'm just wanting to get the sequence styled. So I just mime it out again and again and again until I know, I know the sequence by heart. Don't worry about this at all. Then I'll do it again with my eye. This is what you can do at home, folks, if you want to. Do it again with your eyes closed, just to prove that you really, really know the sequence. Then once I know, muscle memory of just where to put my hands and feet, not worry about that anymore. Then I get on to doing a kind of more intense visualization of, now I've got my eyes closed, I'm miming out the climb, but I'm not just going right hand there, left hand there. I'm going right hand onto that really sharp, painful crimp. Then it's left hand into the undercut. I have to pinch that really tight. As Maddy and Neil were saying, like really clearly visualize, how do the holds feel? When are you going to be trying really, really hard? When are you going to be breathing? All that sort of stuff. But then the bit I wanted to ask you guys about is the final step that I sometimes do when I'm visualizing stuff. What do you both think of visualizing an imperfect but successful performance on a climb? As in, I would have rehearsed and visualized me doing it flawlessly over and over and over again. What I sometimes worry about, though, is that if I visualize this perfect performance and then I have like a tiny little foot slip at some point, that might completely throw me off. So sometimes I'd practice it a few times, performing it perfectly in my head. And then I'd also do a visualization of, here's me climbing it. And then, oh no, my foot slips and I pull really, really, really hard. And then I finish the climb anyway. Helpful thing to do? Pointless? What do you guys reckon?
Yeah, I actually think it's a really good idea. And I guess probably when I do it for myself personally, I may be visualizing slightly different scenarios just because maybe it's in trad climbing or something, but
only the gear fell out.
Or even just red points. And I guess this sort of also goes into that fear of falling, fear of failure element, because I will often visualize imperfect outcomes, or what I, maybe not that, flawless execution that I planned, but I might visualize falling off and actually maybe controlling my emotions in that scenario. So, it wasn't a dangerous fall. I fell off, and I've definitely chatted to quite a few people who, get quite angry maybe in this scenario at the crag, or potentially really scared, at really adding in that visualization of the emotion and how you feel in that moment. And I think that can really help with emotional regulation. And again, in that moment before I fall, a bit like you said, like maybe I realize I'm getting too pumped or something, and it's a time when I might get scared and get flustered, but I'm visualizing in those moments, staying calm, breathing, maybe going for a move, but not getting it. And, I think like playing out a few different scenarios, both on the side where you still complete it. So a bit like you said, I guess in bouldering, I think particularly, and in red points when we do, I think I see it a lot and I've done it myself. We get so into wanting to do something flawlessly, and we practiced it so much that if something doesn't quite go according to plan, you see people drop off, like that fight goes. And I think that managing that state of arousal in that scenario so that you keep fighting, I think is really important. So something I find useful is that foot popping, trying really hard, as well as like, visualizing that, maintaining tension in my body. Maybe I start to do like a bit more of a audible quick breath, to like, and I'm bringing that arousal state up, and then maybe I complete the move and I slow my breathing down exactly how I would to regain calm on the route. I think really exploring that variety of outcomes in those scenarios is really useful.
I've got a final bit. Sorry, Neil, you go ahead, man.
Well, no, I mean, to answer your question, do I think it's useful? I mean, I think it's essential. And would I just imagine one thing that I did slightly wrong and correcting it? No, I'd go to town and I would sit and I would try my best to think of every possible thing that might go wrong. And then I'd imagine myself dealing with it. And that was what I did before leading my route last year final score. And, I just thought I have to have every single base covered, every eventuality dealt with. And then I can just set out on this route knowing that whatever the problem is, I've got a coping strategy. It transpired that something did actually go wrong that I hadn't pre-planned, but I had a bit of an issue with my rope, like stepping over the rope, and a bit of drag that just caught me out at a really, really worrying moment and really, really sent me off my
gosh.
But, next time I'll when I'm going through things before my next project, I'll add that one in. And this is climbing, isn't it? We learn from all those little things that go wrong and we stick them in the bank. I just before, in case we move on, there was just like coming back to where we were a little bit earlier talking about, you could do these visualizations, which to some feel a bit like abstract, and it's like, oh, this is a bit weird. Why am I sitting in a room with my eyes closed, imagining things? I'm weirding myself out here. Or you can do these kind of like, exercises and katas, some of which feel a little bit like not much to do with climbing, but there's something that I do myself, which I feel kind of links the two together. And I'm going to have to embarrass myself here by,
he's going to dance.
You can do these sort of routines on the floor where you do like a drop knee, and then you can do like inner flag, and then you can do like outer flag like that. And as you do these routines, you can totally bring in what Maddy was saying about coordinating your breathing with it, and so you kind of like, you're actually making climbing moves, so it feels a bit like you're climbing and you're breathing and you're focused on it. You've got that mind-body connection going on, which Maddy was saying is so important. And that's just that's one that I do because I feel like I'm not so good when it starts to get really, really removed from climbing. I should don't get me wrong, I think these abstract exercises are brilliant, and hey, they're proven, like there's research to prove that they're brilliant. And I know I should do more of them, but I guess also, I think it depends how much time you've got. If you're short on time, you're going to pick the things that feel the most specific to climbing. If you've got time to spare, you're going to maybe like diversify and go on a bit of a journey and try new stuff.
I'm doing Tai Chi and dancing today. I'm very excited about it. And can I just say, I was so badly hoping that today's discussion would, at various points, devolve into each of us getting up and like demonstrating stuff in front of the camera. So, Maddy, make sure you find an opportunity as well. Because me and
well, I think I'm doing a dance lesson on Sunday, so I've not finalised my moves yet. But I do think it's something I used to do dancing. That's what I did before I started climbing. So, and I think it's a really great way to practice a routine, learn where your body is in space, and move to a rhythm and a pace and stuff. So I think it's really great. And I really liked Neil. I mean, if anyone watches this and hasn't watched the Adam Ondra film about silence, I think if anyone's not quite sure on the connection to climbing or maybe how this is used in the top end of our sport, I much recommend going and watching that, because I guess what you're talking about, Neil, is what Andre does in that, where there's the visualization component, obviously closing his eyes, but then, you know, a bit of an external stimulus, so that when you get that hold or do that drop knee, you do get that feeling of your body doing it as well, which I think is really great.
I've got one more thing to add, a final tangent, and then I'm finally done. But just because we've danced around it a few times, we mentioned mindfulness in movement, and we talked now about dancing as well. I think for me, the closest analogy to root reading would often be dancing, of like, you've got to memorize a sequence and perform the steps in order. But actually, I think practices like dancing, or I mentioned Tai Chi before, or yoga would be the most common one, are really, really good practices to get into if you're a climber, because although we talk a lot about the connection between mind and body when we're climbing, I think actually climbing very often devolves into a very binary success or fail sort of thing. Like, either you did the climb and hooray, you walk away and do something else, no matter how badly you actually did it, as long as you got to the top, or you didn't do it, in which case try it again. And as soon as you do it, no matter how badly it was, you often move on. And there's not a lot of time spent in climbing learning to do things well rather than to just do them. The difference between doing it once and mastering it that we talked about earlier. So really strongly recommend everybody practices like yoga, dancing, or Tai Chi, where you're not just focusing on just do it and succeed and get through the lesson. You're focusing on breathing at the right moments, having everything in exactly the right place, focusing on exactly what your body's doing. So helpful for climbing. Okay, now I'm shutting up. Let's go on to the next question.
Well, no, just to say, I think also to look for lessons within these drills, these seemingly abstract drills, which are actually like really, really similar to climbing. Like, for example, slacklining teaches you this wonderful thing. When you fall off a slackline, if you get frustrated and you get straight back on it, you always do worse.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm going to get back on. Oh, why did I do that? The only way you can do it is you have to actually forcibly pull yourself off this slackline, stand away from it for a few moments, whether it's anything between 30 seconds and a minute, take some deep breaths, reset, and then get back on this slack line, and you get further. It's exactly the same when you fall off a boulder problem. You get frustrated, you get straight back on, you think you're going to do better, but you always do worse. And there's your metaphor, you know, and there's a lot of metaphors like that are hidden within these exercises that we can perform at home or in our back garden.
Yeah, you're right. It's all about sort of, I think we're all really attached to climbing. We think it's this really unique sport, which it is. But if you distill it down, I think you do get to these sort of base components, a bit like that are in yoga or Tai Chi or dancing. And I think you start to realize that there is really quite a link to using those to develop your movement for climbing during lockdown. So it's the last question. And I feel like we've talked about like mindfulness and mindful movement and visualization. And I'm going to really just spin it around and talk about calisthenics.
Ooh.
So what are the pros and cons? And does being able to do a one-arm handstand make you a better climber?
Okay. So I would say actually the use of momentum that you see people have in calisthenics is really helpful for climbers to learn. It's a really efficient way of moving, that like flopping around like a salmon while they're doing muscle ups and pull-ups. It's just a better way to do muscle ups and pull-ups. If the aim is to get over the bar, that's loads more efficient than pulling up like that. So I would say definitely look at how they're using momentum to do these movements more efficiently. Campusing whilst flopping around like that is loads more efficient than like locking off and statically reaching for stuff. But those floppy salmon skills that I mentioned do need to be practiced. So look closely at what they're doing. With regards to doing handstands and how relevant it is for climbing, I didn't even realize you meant one-arm handstands when I read the question. I thought it was just two-arm handstands.
I think I've just thrown that in there randomly.
Either way, okay. So specific times when I found a boulder, for me it's boulder specific, but specific times when I found I need to do a handstand to do this boulder, I've come across two. So in a way I'd say, and they were like weird comp problems. So I'd say, okay, in a way, no, being able to do a handstand is not relevant for climbing. On the other hand though, there are a lot of climbs that I've really struggled on where I was standing on something and pushing up against something like that. I've always felt really significantly weak doing that. And if I was, surprisingly, I'm also not very good at handstands. So I think actually, yes, being better at handstands would just mean I'd be more comfortable on yet another style of climb that I'm not so keen on. Really, with all of these skills, there's a lot of times where you say, no, not that relevant. But if you've got time to pursue it, it might be just yet another option that you could use on a climb you're struggling on. So better to have more options if you've got time to pursue it.
I'm just going to say it's bottom of the list. Sometimes easier if I just take a stance on it, isn't it? There you go.
I appreciate your honesty, Neil. I appreciate your honesty. I guess I probably sit somewhere in the middle, in that we are in lockdown, and when I think about it as kind of distilling out climbing and seeing what ingredients I actually can get from all these other places, I do think there's just an element that learning a new movement just challenges us, and this is what we get from climbing, and keeping that up from a sort of mental level as well as a physical level, I think is really great and can be really fun. And I think given that I think calisthenics and potentially handstands or maybe a planche, especially if they use quite climbing specific muscle groups, I guess like Louis said, we do push up into things, and like the planche, say, is quite core related.
Front levers would be a great one.
Front levers, things like this. So I'm not saying that every single calisthenics movement I think would be equally high priority during lockdown, but I think there is some that it's quite easy to see that link to climbing. And there's quite a lot of really good YouTube videos out there where people really break it down into very manageable chunks. And I guess I'd just say, for anyone looking to do that, if you find one of those, what I find can be quite useful, and some of the videos even lay this out for you anyway, is that you take that easiest version and maybe you try to do 10 reps of it or hold it for a certain amount of time. And then once you've done that 2 sessions in a row, you can try the next slightly harder thing, and that just helps you to sort of keep your progression rolling and sort of keep looking forward to the next session when you can sort of push on to the next movement. So I think it just gives you that opportunity, essentially, to do what we've been talking about throughout most of this discussion, to try something. It's a challenge, to fail at it, to learn, and ultimately, hopefully keep that movement element up. And all the calisthenics have a pretty big strength element in them anyway, around the shoulders and the core, which is great for climbing.
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks, guys. And thanks, everyone, for listening. And I think next time we will be answering some of your questions on advanced fingerboarding, as well as giving some of our views maybe on the most common mistakes we see out there. So look forward to joining you for that one.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Neil. Bye.